Hey Reddit, my name is Lauren. I am 24, and this story is about how my stepdad thought I was his built in babysitter until I showed him that I was not playing that game. So let me set the stage a little clearer. I grew up in a small suburban town in Pennsylvania. My parents, Mark and Susan, were not flashy or wealthy, but they were solid. My dad owned a little sign printing business where he would make banners, flyers, and the kind of posters small shops need to get noticed. My mom worked as a secretary at the middle school. They were hardworking people who believed in doing the right thing, taking care of family, and teaching me responsibility. They never spoiled me, but they made me feel valued. By the time I was 12, I was already helping with grown-up tasks. My dad would sit me down in front of the computer to help him design flyers, and I would spend evenings balancing the ledgers with my mom. When money was tight, I learned to tighten screws on a shaky chair or patch up small things around the house. Dad was always telling me, if you learn to solve problems, you will never be helpless. And I carried that in my bones. He was my rock, my safety net, and my best teacher. And then when I was 17, life crashed. A car accident. Just one call and everything broke. No warnings, no last goodbye. He was gone, and suddenly it was just me and Mom against the world. She held it together for me, but I saw how badly it broke her. I worked to keep us afloat. I picked up shifts at Starbucks, later at Target, and saved every dollar I could while trying to keep my grades up. Eventually, I made it to college, studied design, and worked my way into a career in UX design. It is not glamorous, but it is stable. I make enough to cover my rent, save, and even help my mom when she is tight on money. I was proud of what I had built and proud of Mom for surviving everything and still laughing again. So when she started dating after years of being alone, I thought, good for her. She deserves someone who makes her smile. And then came Tom. Tom is 45, divorced, with 2 kids of his own. Ethan is 7 and Lily is 5. At first, Tom played the part. He was polite, acted interested in my work, asked questions about my job like he cared. The kids were young, loud, sticky-fingered chaos machines, but I did not blame them. That is what children are. They spilled juice, they shouted, they had meltdowns over toys. Annoying but normal. What mattered to me was that Mom was smiling again, and I was glad she had found someone. But the mask always slips. After the wedding, Tom's true colors bled through. Suddenly, I was not Lauren the daughter anymore. I was Lauren the babysitter. It started small. Can you watch the kids for a couple of hours while we grab dinner? Sure, I could do that once. Then it became movie night babysitting. Then entire weekends. His reasoning? Lauren works from home, so it's easy for her. As if my work laptop was some daycare management system where I could balance deadlines and 2 screaming children at once. The kids did not make it easier. Ethan once dumped an entire family-sized box of cereal on the carpet because he was making snow. Lily got into my markers one day and scribbled all over my project notes, which were not replaceable. They once managed to flood the upstairs bathroom because Tom forgot to watch them while I was scrambling to finish a client deadline. Every time I raised it, Tom brushed me off with a smug, "Relax, you're young, you can handle it." The breaking point came last month. I was in the middle of a professional Zoom call with a client, the kind where I am presenting a project that I had spent weeks on, and Tom barges straight into my room without knocking. He does not care that I have headphones on, does not notice the faces staring at me from the screen. He just says, "Hey, Lauren, you will watch the kids this weekend. Your mom and I are going away." I told him no, I had deadlines. He looked me dead in the eye, completely serious, and said, "Either you babysit my kids, or your mom will be alone." You would not do that to her, would you? This man, a 45-year-old father of 2, tried to emotionally blackmail me with my mom's happiness. That was it. I told him, "Tom, you made those kids. Babysit them yourself." He stormed out, slammed the door, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But within an hour, my phone was blowing up with calls from Mom. 40 missed calls in total. Tom had run straight to her and told her that I refused to support the family, that I did not care about her happiness, that I was selfish. My mom was panicked and upset until I explained what really happened. That is when I knew I had to put an end to this once and for all. So I planned my revenge. Step 1, receipts. I gathered everything. Screenshots of work deadlines, Slack messages about projects, text threads where Tom dumped the kids on me, and recordings, perfectly legal in Pennsylvania, of him saying things like, "Your mom will be alone if you do not watch them." Step 2, audience. I waited for the perfect chance, and it came during family dinner at my grandparents' house. Everyone was there: Mom, Tom, my grandparents, my 2 aunts. Big audience. Tom started bragging at the table about his romantic getaway with Mom, smirking like he had already won, and I cut him off. I said, "Oh, you mean the one where you tried to blackmail me into babysitting your kids?" The room went silent. Every fork froze in midair. I pulled out the screenshots and the recordings and laid them on the table. My grandma, who is 78 and has no patience for nonsense, looked straight at Tom and said, "So you married my daughter for a babysitter?" Tom's face turned red, then pale, then red again. Mom was furious, but not at me. She turned to Tom and said, "If you ever try to manipulate my daughter again, you will be the one alone." And like magic, Tom suddenly discovered how to be a parent. Now he takes his kids to soccer and ballet, packs their lunches, and even manages to cook hot dogs without collapsing in exhaustion. He has not dared to barge into my room since. The cherry on top? Last week, little Ethan whispered to me, "Daddy says you are bossy, but I think you are cool." Even his kids can see right through him. Spoiler, I will never babysit for free again. A week after the family dinner blow-up, Tom decided to try a different angle. He must have thought that if outright manipulation did not work, playing the helpless victim would do the trick. Suddenly, he was sick. Not hospital sick, not even the kind of sick that makes you stay in bed all day, but the conveniently timed kind of sick that pops up exactly when you are supposed to handle responsibility. He sat on the couch like a dying Victorian nobleman, clutching his head and groaning about a splitting headache and a terrible sore throat. He even threw in a cough that sounded like it had been rehearsed. At first, Mom was worried, but I had already seen enough of his performance to know exactly what was happening. This man had been perfectly fine the day before. In fact, I had seen pictures on Facebook of him at the golf course with his buddy, grinning with a drink in his hand. So while he lounged on the couch wrapped in a blanket, sighing dramatically, I just leaned against the wall and reminded him that he had been well enough to play 18 holes yesterday. The look on his face was priceless. Mom turned to me, then turned to him, and for the first time I saw her put her foot down without hesitation. She told him that I was not the babysitter, that I had my own job and my own life, and if he felt sick, then he could take some Dayquil like an adult and handle his kids. She said that family does help family, but that did not mean exploiting me every time he wanted an out. Tom sulked, but the funniest part was watching him try to argue while still pretending to be sick. He slumped further into the couch, groaning like he had been mortally wounded, but Mom just ignored him and went about her business. When Ethan and Lily asked about dinner, Tom sat there waiting for someone to volunteer. Nobody did. I stayed in my room finishing work. Mom made herself a sandwich, and the kids eventually stood in front of him hungry and impatient. With no audience left for his sick act, he had no choice. He got up, shuffled dramatically into the kitchen, and actually made them dinner. He sulked all night, but the kids got their dinner, made by him. After the whole sick act failed, Tom seemed to retreat into sulking mode for a while. But that did not mean he stopped being lazy. If anything, it was like he doubled down on avoiding responsibility, as if he thought if he played useless long enough, someone else would pick up the slack. And that someone was always supposed to be me. Mom started noticing it more clearly, and not just with the kids. It was everything. Yard work? Suddenly Tom was too busy with phone calls, which I later figured out were him scrolling sports stats or trash-talking with his buddies. The grass would grow ankle-high before Grandpa finally stopped by and made a pointed comment, which magically guilt-tripped Tom into mowing once every 6 weeks. Cooking? He would announce dramatically that he was too tired after a long day of what exactly? Because his work-from-home job consisted of sitting on conference calls, then spending the rest of the day scrolling his phone while pretending to be swamped. Helping Ethan or Lily with homework. Forget it. His excuse was always, that's what school is for. Which meant the kids were either left to figure it out themselves or mom ended up stepping in after her own exhausting day at work. Meanwhile, there was me. I was the one covering my share of utilities, chipping in for groceries without being asked, paying my rent on time, and balancing deadlines that actually paid for something. And somehow, Tom still had the nerve to act like I owed him free labor because we were family. He could sit back and let me juggle everything while he enjoyed being the big man who did nothing. The cracks were showing for Mom too. She loved him, or at least she loved the version of him he pretended to be when they first met, but reality was different. And it finally came to a head last week. She came home from work exhausted, still in her scrubs, and walked into a disaster. Tom was on the couch, headset on, playing Xbox like a teenager, shouting at his friends through the microphone. Upstairs, the kids were screaming loud enough that I had to pause my own Zoom call and mute myself 3 times. Ethan was melting down because Lily had taken his markers. Lily was crying because he had shoved her, and Tom had not moved an inch to check on them. Mom took it all in, and I could see the switch flip in her. She had been forgiving, patient, willing to make excuses for him because she wanted her marriage to work. But in that moment, she saw what I had been seeing for months. He was not a partner, not a husband, and not much of a father either. He was just another responsibility for her to carry. She walked into the living room, looked at him sitting there with his controller in hand, ignoring the chaos upstairs, and finally snapped. She told him, I didn't marry another child. So here's where things got really messy, Reddit. Remember how I said Tom's ex-wife, Rebecca, found out about his babysitter scam? Yeah, that wasn't just a phone call. That was the opening act. What I didn't realize at first was just how long Tom had been running his mouth. Apparently, he had been bragging to Rebecca for months that he had this strong family support system now that he was remarried. He painted this whole fantasy where I was basically a built-in co-parent. His exact excuse for pushing for more custody time was that I was stepping up so much that it proved he could handle having the kids more often. He literally told her, Lauren helps so much with the kids. They love her, and she's basically like a third parent. Excuse me? Sir, I'm not a third parent. I'm not even a half parent. I am 24 years old, working a full-time design job, paying my own bills, and trying to build a life. Nowhere in that description is running a free daycare for a 45-year-old man who cannot manage his own children. But Rebecca? She is sharp. She has been through his games before, and she knows exactly how to play the long one. She did not confront him directly. Instead, she picked up the phone and called my mom. Very calm, very matter-of-fact, she asked so. Tom says your daughter is co-parenting my kids now. Is that true? My mom was horrified. She explained everything, how Tom kept dumping Ethan and Lily on me at the worst times, how he barged into my work meetings to demand babysitting, how he used emotional manipulation about her being alone as leverage against me. Rebecca just laughed, this dry, knowing laugh, and said, classic Tom, always finding someone else to carry his weight. And then she dropped the real bomb. She told Mom that Tom had been using me as evidence in his custody filings. He had argued that he deserved more custody weekends because he had me there to step in. In his words, I was proof he could provide stability. That was the last straw for her. Rebecca decided she was done playing nice. She went straight to her lawyer and filed a motion with family court to adjust custody. Her argument was airtight. Tom was misrepresenting his household situation and offloading his parental responsibilities onto me, a non-parent with no legal or biological tie to those children. And family court judges hate that. They want parents to parent, not to pass their kids off to whoever happens to be convenient. The best part? Rebecca didn't just have her word against his. She had my receipts. My mom, who was beyond fed up by this point, handed over everything. Screenshots of Tom's texts telling me to babysit, Slack messages showing when I was pulled from work, and the audio clip of him saying the infamous line, either you babysit my kids or your mom will be alone. Rebecca later told me that when her lawyer read that line, he actually laughed and said, this is gold. Court day came, and I tagged along mostly to see the circus. Rebecca showed up looking sharp, professional, and completely prepared. Tom, on the other hand, looked like he had rolled straight out of his man cave. Baggy polo, wrinkled khakis, muttering under his breath, like the whole thing was a waste of his time. He puffed up his chest when it was his turn to speak, telling the judge he deserved more custody because he provided stability now, that he had remarried, and that his stepdaughter helped raise the kids. Rebecca didn't even have to say much. She just slid the binder of evidence across the table. Screenshots, transcripts, the audio clip, all of it neatly organized. The judge flipped through, raised one eyebrow, and then looked Tom dead in the eye and asked, "So, when exactly were you planning on becoming a parent instead of delegating to a 24-year-old?" Tom froze. He stammered something about how I loved the kids, how I was happy to help, but it came out weak and hollow. And then came the dagger. Rebecca, calm as ever, said she loves them enough not to let them flood a bathroom while he's playing Xbox. The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge cracked a smile. Tom's face went red, then white, then red again. The verdict was swift. Rebecca won. Custody adjusted back in her favor. Tom lost one of his weekends and, to top it off, the judge ordered that all pickups and drop-offs be supervised until Tom could demonstrate actual parenting. Translation: no more dumping his kids on me and using me as a bargaining chip. The cherry on top? Child support. Since he lost custody time, his payments went up. Rebecca texted me afterwards saying, "Thanks, Lauren. I just got a raise courtesy of your stepdad's stupidity." I could practically hear her laughing through the phone. But the best part of the entire ordeal was watching Tom's face as the judge laid down the ruling. He looked like someone had taken away his Xbox, his last beer, and his fantasy of being seen as a competent father all in the same moment. He stormed out of the courtroom muttering, but nobody cared. And me? I walked out of that courthouse lighter than air. Because for once, I wasn't the one carrying his dead weight. So Reddit, when Tom left with his sad little duffel bag to crash at his buddy's place, I thought that was the end of it. Like, he'd stew in his own self-pity for a week, realize mom wasn't backing down, and either shape up or ship out for good. But Tom being Tom, he doubled down. The first week he was gone, things in the house felt lighter. No Xbox blasting in the living room, no guilt trips tossed my way, no constant tension when mom walked in from work and saw him sprawled on the couch like a decorative throw pillow. It was quiet, peaceful even. Mom and I actually cooked dinner together, laughed, and she told me she hadn't realized how heavy things had gotten until Tom's absence showed her what normal was supposed to feel like. But peace doesn't last long when you're dealing with a guy like Tom. He started with texts. At first, they were all apologies, the classic "I'm a good man who made mistakes" routine. He said he was working on himself, trying to be better, reading articles about fatherhood. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd copy-pasted from a self-help blog. Then when mom didn't cave, the messages shifted. Suddenly, he was the victim. He told her she was breaking apart the family and that she was choosing me over him. He even tossed in that her late husband would be disappointed. That one crossed a line. I saw mom's face when she read it hard, cold, like she'd finally snapped inside. Meanwhile, Rebecca, the ex-wife, was thriving. She'd just gotten that custody adjustment in her favor, and now Tom's attempts to use me as leverage had blown up in his face. She even texted mom to check in, telling her that she understood what it was like to live with someone who would rather play the victim than be a parent. The wild part? Rebecca and my mom actually started getting along. They bonded over shared war stories, and I swear half their conversations ended with laughter about Tom's cluelessness. The kids, Ethan and Lily, were confused, of course. They asked me a couple of times why Tom wasn't around, and I told them the truth in the gentlest way I could. Their dad was figuring out how to be a better parent. They didn't seem surprised. In fact, Ethan rolled his eyes and said, he better figure it out fast. Kids notice more than adults give them credit for. But here's where things turned. Tom didn't stay quiet on the sidelines. He started showing up unannounced. He'd pop by to drop something off for the kids or talk to mom, but really, it was just to weasel his way back in. One night, he actually brought dinner, acting like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been kicked out for being a grown child who refused to parent his own kids. Mom accepted the food, but her tone was sharp, all business. She reminded him that dropping by uninvited wasn't going to cut it, and if he wanted to rebuild anything, he needed to start with his kids, not her. The real kicker came when Tom's buddy, who he'd been crashing with, finally got fed up. Apparently, Tom wasn't paying rent, eating the guy's food, and hogging his TV for hours of Call of Duty. The buddy kicked him out. Suddenly, Tom was back at our door, suitcase in hand, looking pitiful. He tried to pull the sympathy card, telling Mom that he had nowhere else to go. Mom didn't flinch. She told him point blank that he needed to find his own place, that she wasn't a safety net for a grown man who couldn't carry his weight. And this time, she meant it. Tom ended up renting a tiny studio apartment on the other side of town. Not glamorous, not comfortable, but it was his. He complained nonstop about the rent, about how Rebecca was squeezing him with child support, about how hard it was to start over. But the thing is, for the first time, he actually had to. He had no one else to lean on. No wife to cover the bills, no stepdaughter to babysit, no ex to tolerate his excuses. Just Tom, a microwave, and four walls. For me, it was surreal watching it all unfold. I had gone from being his unpaid babysitter to the catalyst of his downfall, simply by refusing to play his game anymore. And while part of me felt bad for the kids, I knew they were better off with Rebecca and with a dad who was being forced to either grow up or fade out. Mom and I, we grew stronger through all of this. She told me one night while we were closing up the kitchen that she felt like she had her life back. She admitted she had ignored too many red flags with Tom, hoping for stability after losing Dad, but now she realized she didn't need a man to carry her forward. She had me, and she had herself. That was enough. Tom still hovers on the edges of our lives, custody schedules, awkward drop-offs, and the occasional half-hearted text to Mom. But his power in the household? Gone. His role as the man of the house? Shattered. And his little fantasy of me as his built-in babysitter? Dead and buried. It's strange to think how fast everything flipped. One minute, I was drowning in his expectations. The next, I was standing on solid ground, watching him stumble through the mess he made. And that's where I'll leave this story, Reddit. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being with me through all of it, through the chaos, the drama, and the small victories that build up into something bigger. This has been one hell of a ride, but for the first time in a long time, I feel free. Goodbye, and thank you for being with us all this time.